Okay, well, welcome back to Stock Talk. So today I'm going to spend almost the entire time talking about individual stock requests that came through. I got a pretty large number this week, which is great. Want to keep seeing those stocks come through. And I think it'll make for a really good show today, especially with what's going on in the market. A lot of different areas we're going to discuss. And the lesson today is basically going to be really brief because I want to do just a quick review of what we've been looking at. So if we look at the agenda for today, I'm looking at the weight of the evidence, meaning all the things that I look at, and I'm just going to go through them really quickly, just almost as a review of some of the shows that we've done so far, and just to make sure you're putting it all together. And then we're going to go through all the stocks that came through. So for anyone interested, my services can be found at rabilstockresearch.com. I go through a significant number of stocks during the course of a month to try and identify the best patterns that I think, especially looking at the longer term trends, trying to identify, say, over the next 3 to 6 months, which stocks have some real potential. So if interested, go ahead to rabilstockresearch.com/services. And I am offering a discount. If you put in the coupon code StockTalk, you get the first 2 months for $50. So let's get into the weight of the evidence, and I want to zoom in on this. And so let's just talk about this briefly. So I look at multiple time frames. We'll see that when I get into the individual stocks. We've got 18-month moving average, which acts as a key to the long-term trend, something really important to watch if you're looking for bigger trends. Now, even if you're a trader, you want to know where this 18-month line is. So I like to look at that. I like to make sure that's my starting point. The 40-month acts as support and resistance and can act and can give us some semblance of what's going on the bigger picture as well, but I do lean on the 18-month for my long-term bias. I like to use the 18 and the 40 week in conjunction with the monthly line to help with entry and exits. Now, if I'm looking for shorter term trends, I'll go down a time frame and I'll be looking at the 18 week for the trend and then the 18 day and 40 day for entries. Now, I look at relative strength. I talked about that last week. Obviously, very important. The most important part about it is because we're trying to identify the best stocks. And so relative strength is going to tell us what are the best stocks. Now, a lot of times I'll use my other indicators, MACD and ADX, to help me find stocks that I think are going to show new relative strength. But relative strength is key. So I've got MACD, which is helping more for entry and exit purposes, and I've shown that in a couple of different videos. ADX really helps me define a list of stocks. So if I have a list of 2,000 stocks and I'm trying to narrow it down to find which ones are the best ones, I'm going to use ADX to identify that list. And then volume always plays a role in what I'm doing. So I like to look for signs of accumulation based on the volume to confirm the ADX, especially the DI lines. And if we're going to a topping phase or some type of a distribution phase, I'm looking at the volume to help with that as well. So that's kind of my weight of the evidence. These are keys to what I'm looking at. There are a few other things that I look at, but these are the core of what I'm trying to view on each and every stock. So let's go ahead and get into the individual stocks. We got a lot to cover today. Okay, first stock we have here is VERI. So let's just quickly review. So we're talking about the weight of the evidence, right? So bottom left is the monthly chart. Bottom right is a weekly. Upper right is a daily. And then upper left, I have another weekly chart with just an 18-month overlay, an 18-week line, and the relative strength over here in the upper left. So I like to have that as a separate chart. I've got MACD and ADX on every single time frame. I've also got the 18 and the 40 on each time frame as well. Those are simple moving averages. Okay, so VERI. If you notice what's happened here, start with the monthly chart, big move to the upside. It was kind of a spiky sort of top here, but we came down, but we found support. We spent 3 or 4 months working sideways right around this rising 18-month line, and we've caught up with that. And notice how MACD is still holding its signal line. So on a monthly chart, this still looks okay. And now we're getting the weekly chart to sort of cup around. Now, we're not got back up through the 40-week, and realize the 40-week is the same as the 200-day, so it is an important line no matter how you look at it. I like the way this is cupping around, but I'd probably like to see just a little bit more confirmation in the near term. Now, we could do that one of two ways. We could come back and test the 18 one more time and then turn up, or on a daily chart, we could see this. We've broken out of this low ADX sign with pretty good DI. But the way this is pulled back, notice how this had sort of a violent little gap down. I personally would like to see that overcome, maybe get back up through 25 and change and confirm that this is really turning up again. Overall, the pattern looks pretty good. This is definitely one I'd be watching pretty close just based on everything that's taking place. AZO has been in a nice trend. I would consider this more of a hold right now than a buy. I think this has already made a pretty big move. If we look at the weekly chart, this sort of shows what's taken place. We broke out around 1250. We had a low ADX, a MACD zero line reversal with low ADX. Got the moves going, and then we've had two pullbacks to the 18-week. The 18-week is the key here. I think as long as we hold the 18-week, the intermediate term trend is up. Now we've gone to a new high, so MACD isn't confirming on this move. So if we were to come back down through that, we'd probably come back and test this 1500 area. But just something to be on the lookout for. I think as long as we hold the 18-week, the intermediate term trend is up. Just a little late to be a buyer at this point. So BGS, we had this move to the upside, and I know why. We're looking at this stock because we're showing pretty good ADX strength on this time frame. Look at the monthly, and the ADX is rising, but we have to realize that that is taking place because of this big move in this spike here, right? We had this big spike. Now, overall, even if you took that spike out, this is still a pretty nice move to the upside and then a healthy consolidation pattern. So it looks pretty good. I just don't think it looks quite as good as the ADX is telling us. I think that really helped the weekly line because of this big spike to the upside. So I'm sort of tempering my my look for this. I want to watch and see if we get strength coming back up through. So I think the best way to handle this is to draw like a trend line, something along these lines, and look for this to sort of come out of this little triangle pattern that's developing, little wedge that's forming with the zero line reversal pattern potentially. And if that takes place, then I think I'd be intrigued. Now, you could be a little bit more aggressive and play it off the daily breakout if you want. But I think using some form of a trend line on the weekly chart is going to be pretty important here. Let's look at CRM. I had a specific question about this. Someone who had played this and actually played it pretty well. They made some money, got out, and then on this pullback here, their question was, this looked like a pinch to the downside. So if you notice, we had this move to the downside, and then we had a rally up to the 18, which was rolling over, and we had a little bit of a pinch forming. But what I would caution you is when you look at that, you have to also look at the higher time frame. So I would go up to the weekly chart and recognize that during that pullback, we were actually pinching to the upside with strong ADX, a rising ADX, and we had a bullish pinch on the weekly chart. So I would be less inclined to be worried about the daily. The other thing that I would suggest to you to look for is that this was a rising higher low. When we were looking at that pinch, that was actually a higher low, and MACD was making a lower low. So we had reverse divergence in place on the higher time frame. So I know sometimes this reverse divergence is hard to see. You have to be on the lookout for that. It takes a little time to get good at seeing it, but always look when you're coming down towards the zero line, see if we have that pattern developing. And if we do, that would temper my negative feelings about this 18 rolling over, especially when we have, so from my book, I talk about the multiple time frame rules. And one of the rules is that the higher time frame always overrules the lower time frame. So you got to keep that in mind. If you have a pinch to the downside on the daily and a pinch to the upside on the weekly, you always go with the higher time frame. All right, let's go to the next stock, BRKS. Actually, a pretty nice move, but it made an abrupt end. So normally I'd like to see this spend a little bit more time consolidating, but notice that once this MACD line hit the 0 level, it just took off. So it actually was kind of tough because I would have drawn a trend line like this. So you'd have kind of waited for this move back up through 95, something like that. It wasn't as tight of a trend line that I would normally like. If this was to come down one more time, then you could have put a little bit tighter entry on it. But either way, it has shown a lot of strength here. And I do like what's going on the ADX on the daily chart. So I think we have to keep this in mind on a little bit of a pullback here. I think there's potential for more upside. You know, the stock is trading really well relative to the semis. Most semis are really struggling here. So I like to see stocks when a group is getting hit, which one is holding up really well. Now, maybe don't press this. Don't force this until we start to see better action in the semis overall. Okay, let's go to SKYW. So one of the things I'd like to do is look at this. Look at how the monthly 18 was declining all the way through, and now it's turning up. We held it on a pullback, and now it's turning up. We also have a pinch because we have lower highs on a pullback to the 18, and the MACD held with a little pinch towards its signal line. So those are positives. The negative is when I look at this chart and I just see, look at all the resistance up here. You can see it on the monthly, especially on the weekly up here around 60. So I think it has to be played as a trade. It's more of a short-term trade. I'd be watching for kind of a pullback here, maybe a little bit closer to 48, 49, something like that, as a potential entry with a target up towards 60. I don't know that it's really worth trying to expect a breakout in this one right now. I think it's a little too early for that. Now, Dell is another one that I'm pretty impressed with. It looked like it was starting a correction, and I thought we'd see a deeper pullback, but what's taking place is another one of these reverse divergences. Look at how a significantly higher low in price, and we're actually getting a lower low in the MACD. We have low ADX, and we're actually starting to see the green DI on the weekly start to come back up again, sort of like a continuation signal. So that's nice confirmation. So what I like to do is when price comes back up through a prior peak after going through a correction, I want to see DI do the same thing. You see how we made a higher high in green DI while price made a higher high. That is good upside continuation confirmation. If we make a new high in price like that and they take out that prior peak and green does not do that, then we have to question what's going on. Okay, so that's a nice little tidbit I want to make sure you're on the lookout for in continuation signals. KL. This is another gold stock that, I mean, actually is holding up really well relative to gold, but gold is having a tough time in here. And I'd like to see a little bit more confirmation out of this stock. I mean, it's turned up and tried to consolidate. We have a low ADX condition, and I don't really consider that a good breakout. You know, we've gone up here and tried to break out, but really haven't confirmed the breakout. We had a one-day gap up that closed near the low end of the range, and then it gapped down the following day. So that's really not good confirmation. So if we can come back up through that area around 45, have some volume, and maybe on a closing basis have a strong day, then I'd feel like maybe this is going to get going. But I think this is going to have a really hard time moving up without other gold stocks kicking in. So yeah, we've got a few stragglers, but I really want to see gold in general start to show better improvement. Let's look at Caesars Entertainment. So a lot of improvement in gambling stocks, in casinos, in hotels and stuff like that. This was another one that I want to look at the weekly because we had gone through a nice move to the upside, and then look at how it pulled back. And when the 18 rolls over like that, I really don't expect this to just go break out like this did. So I don't know. I prefer to actually see this spend a little bit more time consolidating now. I would definitely prefer to see this check back earlier here before it got going. So it's a little bit of an awkward pattern from that standpoint. And I don't know. I'm sort of questioning this breakout. I would be expecting another test a little bit lower, maybe not all the way to 100, but maybe a little bit better test down of support, which I do believe new support is in the low 100 area. So just be careful there. If you're long this stock, I don't have a problem with that. You probably have to give it a little bit of room under 100 though. If you're going to have a stop in place, I think you might have to give it a little bit of room. A tight stop might get stopped out here. Let's look at FANG, because really one of the shining stars over the last week or two, while the market has been getting hammered, just hammered, is the energy stocks. And not only are we seeing improvement in a relative strength line, meaning they're not going down as much as the market is going down, the best part about what's going on here is these stocks are actually going up while the market's going down. And we can see that the 18-month line, so I want to show you this, because if you go back and look at the 18-month on almost all the energy stocks, it was declining dating back to 2019 and had been declining. And now just in the last month or two, we're starting to see these lines turn back to the upside. So this is my long-term bias that I talk about in the weight of the evidence. Now, even though the 40-month is still declining, we've gotten through that as resistance, and now we have an improving bias in place. Now, that doesn't mean it's an automatic buy. I want to go down to the lower time frames and look for entry. We actually had a zero line pullback, but it was very awkward because it turned around on a dime. It didn't have a trend line in place. So now we have to go to the daily chart for entry. And we've had a nice move to the upside, improving ADX. Watch for a pullback here. If the pullback is orderly, I would still buy this, even though we have resistance up at 100. If you can get a nice orderly pullback or consolidation based on what's going on in the higher time frames and the group action, I would be interested in playing this. XEC, another energy stock, and this one has just blown it out. Really powerful move to new highs. So another stock I would be considered more as a hold rather than a buy right now. I think we're going to need a better pullback or something like that, maybe closer to 80 to really be considered as a new buying opportunity. It was just another one where it just didn't spend enough time consolidating to give us a great entry point. So I'm willing to accept that sometimes I don't get really good entry. But we want to know by the analysis what the bias is. And the bias turned up in this stock a lot earlier than other energy. Notice how right at the beginning of the year, the 18-month turned up on this stock. So our bias has been up. So if that's the case, then maybe you were looking at this on a pullback with rising moving averages on the weekly, getting down close to the zero line with low ADX, and you're down on the daily chart looking for some kind of entry. Either way, it would have been tough, but this pullback would have probably been your best opportunity. Now it's more of a hold, and I do think I would stick around because there's room up to 100 at least, and potentially even higher based on what the group is doing. FOSL, nice long basing pattern developing. Look at how this was in a long-term downtrend line, tried to turn up and then came back down and went to a small new low, a minor new low that didn't last all that long, and it has now come back up. So now we're above this prior low from 2017, and we've got somewhat of a little undercut and rally pattern developing. Good ADX pattern. Yeah, it's being helped by this big spike, but I think overall this is improving pretty significantly. So I am intrigued by this. Now, look at what's going on the weekly chart. We had this move to the upside, pretty nice up move with two pullbacks, and now we're going through more of a complex correction. I would be watching for a trend line break here to maybe kick things off again, and just be on the lookout for a zero line reversal where the MACD crosses up through its signal line now. But really interesting pattern. Now, a simple way to play this is now we know we've got some pretty good action taking place in the monthly. We've got a good setup on the monthly and the weekly. Now we can look for this low ADX pattern on the daily to break out. And, again, I think I would probably put in a trend line, something along these lines. And if we get a breakout to the upside with good volume confirmation, or at least green DI kind of breaking out with price, that would be a pretty decent trigger pattern, I think, in this situation. So Merck, Merck, it's interesting because I don't think Merck has a significant amount of downside. But if we look at this relative strength line, notice how this has just trended to the downside. And what's worse about this is that it has really been trending to the downside relative to the other big drug stocks. Go and look at all the other drug stocks and compare. This stock has not been trading well. It's just been an underperformer. So despite the fact that I think there's very limited downside, I'm just not all that excited about this until I see this kind of exceed 80 and we start to see better relative performance on the break of 80 to the upside. So look for price volume confirmation, but also look for relative strength improvement as well. Now, the exact opposite of this is Microsoft, which has been one of the best stocks, not only this year, but also dating back. I mean, I've talked about this in the past with different, once this broke out in 2013 and got its trend going, this has been one of the best all-time long-term looking patterns you'll ever see. Print this out, put it in a chart book. This is the epitome of a power trend. And notice how every time this is pulled back to the monthly 18, it's found support. This time, though, we're getting a little bit too far away from the 18 on the monthly chart. So I think we're hitting this round number at 300. I think we're finally due for another pullback. We haven't pulled back to it since early 2020. Normally, you get one pullback a year towards the 18-month. We did go from 2017 through 2019, so we're doing that again, and maybe that doesn't happen until early 2022. That's possible, but it does look like we're finally starting to see the ADX line turn down from a little bit of an extended level along with MACD on the weekly chart. So maybe we're starting to correct. We don't have confirmation until we break the 18-week. Look at how the 18-week has continued to hold all year long. So there's no reason to pre-guess this. Don't be a hero. Make this break the 18-week before we get confirmation or before you're doing any heavy selling or shorting in this stock, even if it's for a trade. So Blackstone, another power trend. This has just been an amazing move. It was one of the first stocks to break out in the financial area in 2019, then pulled back, and then we got going again in 2020, and it really was a strong stock with very few pullbacks. But notice again how far away we've gotten from the 18-month line. So we've got this distance, and we had green, 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 green. Look at all these green bars, and we get extended away. Now we got our first red bar developing. This is the last day of the month, so we are going to have a red bar after all these greenies. Taking out the low of that bar would kind of be like an operative sell signal, but more important to me is that we've gotten really far away from the 18-month line. So the trend is good. Don't get me wrong. Momentum is good. Trend is good, but it is overbought and is extended away from the monthly 18. And now we're getting the weekly line. Look at the weekly ADX finally turning down from above 50. So we got up to about 60 or 62, and we're turning back down from that level. So I think this is a pretty significant turn of events, at least for the intermediate term. I don't think it's a long-term reversal, but intermediate term, this could spend the rest of the year going through a correction or a consolidation after such a big run. So you got to keep that in mind. If you haven't taken profits in this run, then I would be looking to do that. I think it's a little too late to be a buyer. Notice the gaps off the high. So I think this is going to take a little bit of time. Be a little patient here before you're looking to be a buyer again. So WDC was a stock we talked about a couple months ago, and I had mentioned at that point that I'd like to see it pull back, and how it pulls back was highly relevant because it was a little too far from the 18-month line, and it was starting to go through a correction on the weekly. Now, here's what's going on the weekly. We've got the 18 below the 40, so we have this sort of opposing trend signal developing. The problem is that while doing that, we gave up a lot from this breakout point. So we didn't just come down and undercut the breakout a little bit and start working sideways. We clearly failed at this breakout level. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two is that we're overrunning the zero line. You see how both lines are going through zero? And to notice the last time that happened, it ended up taking a little while before it could turn around. So I'm not one to jump the gun on this, even though we're getting closer to the 18-month line. Based on what's going on the weekly chart, I would be more inclined to be looking for a little bit more of a complex consolidation pattern before this is ready to turn around. So be patient here. Don't be in a big hurry. Look for the 1, 2, 3 change in trend. So we're looking at a break of the trend line and then come back and test and then look for it to turn back up from there. Okay. Let's go to Spectrum Brands. So another stock that's showing nice pattern here. MACD is getting back through the zero line on the monthly chart. Look at the touchdown on the weekly. You see how we just touched down and bounced right off the zero line on MACD. So in this trade, when you have this pattern in place, low ADX, and we have a zero line consolidation pattern, you draw your trend line because we made a lower low. So we can draw a trend line in place, and the break back up through this trend line is the operative buy signal. Okay. Now, if you missed that, then you could be watching the daily here. The daily is pretty strong. We had a big, strong up bar, and we're still holding above the midpoint of that. So I think there's more upside coming here. Maybe look for a little bit of a dip into the lower 90s or something like that as an entry. TPI composite. So I think this is interesting because we pulled back to this major support area. The 18-month is still rising, but we're overrunning. We're overrunning the 18-month, and that bothers me a little bit. And then if we go to the weekly chart, look at how this is clearly overrun. MACD has clearly overrun the zero line. So we're actually getting oversold in MACD, and I think this is going to probably move back up, come back up here. But we have to look for a more complex reversal. Don't look for the first upturn through the 18 or the 40 or anything like that. Look for more of a complex 1, 2, 3 kind of change in trend now. Because this has been a deeper pullback that we've seen here recently. Goodyear Tire, another stock. Look at how these. So when a stock has made a nice move to the upside and is pulling back on the monthly chart, we want to see if the 18 and the 40 can come together. And notice how we're not really doing that. These stocks are starting up before we get the 18 and the 40 to come together, and before we get a full-fledged ABC consolidation pattern. But what is happening is the MACD is coming down to the zero line, and they're just turning right on a dime. So that's a really good sign of strength. Now, we do have some resistance right up here. Okay, so look for a pullback. And the way I would do that is I would wait for the 18-week to start cupping around. And that should allow the price pattern on the daily chart to come a little bit closer to support again, maybe closer to 17. As long as green DI holds above 25, I think you can continue to look to buy pullbacks. But it would be optimum if the 18-week could flatten out and cup around to really support the trend that's developing here. Let's look at Hilton Grand Vacation. So another stock, very similar pattern. You notice how we had the strong pattern on the monthly chart, pulled back, but it was a very brief pullback. So when we see this, when we get an abrupt move to a new high, you got to look for a pullback on the daily chart back to the 18. 18 provided support on the last pullback, and that's kind of how that would have been your entry down there around 46, something like that. Now I'd look for another pullback close to the breakout level around 47, 47 and a half. But this has good action. Look, we're looking at a stock that's going to a new high while market's going to a new low, at least in the last month. So you got to keep stocks like this in mind. Let's look at one more. OVV. Same sort of pattern where we're starting to improve, but we're trying to improve a big picture reversal. So I think this is going to take a little bit more time. I think we've got a double top forming on the weekly chart. Look for a pullback down closer to 28, 28 and a half, something like that as your next potential buying opportunity. Okay, well, we're going to have to stop here. Thanks for tuning in. Please keep sending those stock requests to stocktalk@stockcharts.com. Any comments or questions you can send to Joe at rabilstockresearch.com. And have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, Grayson Rose here with StockCharts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider giving it a like down below, maybe leave us a comment, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe at the link up above. We're going to bring you daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial experts.